it's not on you to solve the whole problem, right? No one of us can do everything that will roll all this back. We each can do something. Find your thing, find your group. Ideally, find some local group, right? It always feels better to do stuff with other people. Other people will keep you honest. They will keep you engaged. And you know what? You might even have fun. You might even make some new friends. And that's what keeps people engaged, is social connections that reinforce the sense of, I belong to a community that's doing something meaningful, and it's fun to get together and do it. Okay, are we on?
We are on. We did it. The miracle of technology.
Yes. Hello, sir.
Good to meet you. Where are you now? You're out at Hastings?
Actually, no. I'm north of there, in a little hamlet called Golden's Bridge, which is just at the northeast corner of Westchester County. And where are you?
I'm in Manhattan, the East Village.
Aha. Okay.
And actually, I mean, I've heard your name for many, many years, but it was through my buddy Douglas Rushkoff, who I know you know. And I was like, Douglas, who do you know who's actually really involved with, like, maybe involved, putting together these No Kings protests and Indivisible and so on? And he thought that you would be a great person to reach out to.
That's nice.
And then I looked at your bibliography of books, but I didn't have a chance actually to grab one and check it out yet. But it seems like you've been doing a lot of stuff on civic tech and kind of tools to enhance democracy and so on. Maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself for people who are joining from my group who may not know you very well.
Sure. So I started out at The Nation magazine many years ago. Spent the first 13 years of my career there with originally an interest in the Middle East. And then found that topic a bit too depressing to spend my whole life on, and started writing more and more American politics, and in particular, politics outside the two-party, duopoly.
Monopoly.
Yeah. And eventually, I actually wrote a book about third parties. Ross Perot, Ralph Nader, Jesse Ventura, all those people were pretty important back in the 90s. Then I spent some time working on for a nonprofit group called Public Campaign that was devoted to trying to get big money out of politics by creating state-level systems for public financing of elections. And we made some progress. We passed in Maine, in Massachusetts, and Arizona. We actually created those systems, and you can see a continuation of that work even in the New York City public financing system that we have today, even though it's a little bit different. And then the internet came along, and I got the internet bug from my younger brother, who was very involved in the movement to create Linux, the open source software that was demonstrably better and than anything Microsoft was making. And I remember thinking back, this is around 2000, that this collaborative way of working that open source software was showing us, that all of that was eventually going to hit politics. Bottom up, two-way conversation, self-organizing, all of the things were going to dramatically open up how much people participate in politics. And I collided with a guy named Andrew Richey, who perhaps you know, but also a mutual friend of Rushkoff's, who was just starting a conference called Personal Democracy Forum back in 2004. He had just come off trying to help Howard Dean use technology to win the Democratic presidential nomination. And the two of us became partners and built up Personal Democracy Forum, or PDF, as the place to go, where if you wanted to know how the internet was changing politics, whether it was how we run for office or move issues or govern, for 15 years we ran that, and we created a home base for that community called Civic Hall uh, in down in the Flatiron district in Manhattan. And until COVID, Civic Hall was this burgeoning center of gravity for all things civic tech in New York. Um, now, I have to say, throughout all of this, I've always, I've written, I've also organized. I'd say the through line in my work is uh, what will make it more possible for ordinary people to participate in the decisions that affect their lives. Um, and we are obviously in a period where you know the backlash is much stronger than the front lash. Um, but I take the long view here, Daniel. I think we're in a, you know, history doesn't move in a straight line. It's more cyclical. We're obviously in a very bad back cycle. But I suspect this is where you and I may differ. But I do see a lot of grassroots organizing happening now. Um, and
I wanted to get in touch with you because I hoped you would cheer me up.
okay, I mean, there are days where I'm depressed
Yeah.
and overwhelmed too. We are. I get that. I get that, and there's every
I guess my
yeah,
corollary would be that I'm afraid that people in the sort of liberal, progressive, like leftist space
yep,
are actually not alarmed enough, strangely enough, and or not like kind of like acting at this point as if not only immigrants or legal immigrants' lives depended on it, but actually even our lives really depend on what's happening. And I'm friends with so many people, wonderful people in their like 20s and 30s in New York, and they are so dissociated and so disconnected. Like they don't even know what they don't even know what's being taken away from them. They've never really thought about due process. They think that politics is just this like horrible thing that you can just keep ignoring, and they're going to make their art or like do their tantric work or whatever.
mm-hmm,
And I'm kind of at this point very, very concerned, that even in this type of community that I know, liberal, cultural, progressive, there is such a huge disconnection amongst so many people.
yeah,
And that yeah, I feel that last week after Zorhan won, which obviously was amazing, I went and read some of his father's books,
mm-hmm,
and I read one that's about the Rwanda genocide.
yeah,
And I had always assumed, not really studying it closely, that the Hutus and the Tutsis had like a different language or different religion or slightly different ethnic groups and so on. I was surprised to learn that actually it was more like urban, kind of like people who had a little bit more wealth or a little bit more establishment. People who were more like nomad, rural or like farmers or herders or whatever, and that the Belgians had actually, and the Germans had actually created these distinctions and given them
right,
identity cards and been like, you're a Hutu, you're a Tutsi. And then over a few decades, this rage and animosity had grown to the point that, even though a lot of the colonial apparatus was gone, it led to this genocide.
yeah,
And as I said in my email to you, I mean, I think there's very, very, serious reasons to be very concerned that things could actually go to that level here.
mm-hmm,
When you have, these sort of, right wing, white Christian nationalists amassing armaments. When you see the rhetoric they're using, and I pointed you to this book by Lisek and Posobiec,
yeah,
who are inner circle, with Trump and Vance. Like they accompanied Vance to Munich for his talks to NATO and so on. And Posobiec wrote a book called Unhumans, or they wrote a book together called Unhumans, where they basically say that leftists, socialists, liberals, progressives are not actually human, and they don't need to be treated in the same way that human beings are treated. And they say that basically what we need in the US is what Pinochet and Franco did. And they actually praise Pinochet's helicopter killings as a great way to deal with dissidents and journalists. And J.D. Vance, who could easily become, the next ruler of the United States, whatever you want to call it, praised the book and said, this is the right plan for America. This is what we need to do here, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And, if you look at the big, sorry to go on rant a little bit, but I had some coffee and like, I'm awake right now, and then if you read like the big, beautiful bill that they're about to pass, they've amped up the money for ICE
Yeah.
to a huge degree. They're already building basically, concentration camps in Florida and so on. And now they're going to augment that, I don't even know how many times, if it's like 3 times or 20 times, it's like an insane amount more money. And these are a lot of the people, it turns out, who are being brought into ICE are actually, they're sort of like the what are they called? The Proud Boys, they're these sort of like white militia types, so they're armed and ready and game to suppress. And obviously, it's already extremely horrifying what's happening to immigrants and quote unquote illegal immigrants or whatever. But yeah, I could, I'm sort of shocked that isn't even on the front page of the news every day. But that
Sure.
those same tactics, I think, are going to be, most likely used on larger and larger segments of the population. And I don't see the kind of movement underway. Like, it's nice that people go out and pick up their signs, they go to like a protest and so on. But yes, I'm kind of curious. So that's kind of my state of mind at the moment.
Okay. Yeah. I hear you. And let me just say that, uh, as the son of a Holocaust survivor, who is my mother and who is still alive at the age of 92, I both, all of that resonates deeply at the sort of, genetic, epigenetic level. Um, and there are times where I ask myself, um, am I being like the German Jews who, in 1934, 35 said, this will pass, uh, you know, there'll be a coup soon against Hitler, and and besides, leaving is going to be too disruptive. I mean, this is, well documented, right? A lot of people convinced themselves that it was better to stay and wait things out, certainly until Kristallnacht, um, which was not until 1938, if I'm not mistaken. So um, there's no question that there's a, subroutine running in my head going, and where's the red line? At what point do you say, you know, this is too dangerous? This is, you got to move. This is deep in Jewish uh, DNA, right? Like, the reason why we're still here, 2,000 years of exile, is there was always some portion of us that figured out that we better go somewhere else. The ones who stayed in Europe, many of whom were leftists, who didn't believe in nationalism. They weren't going to, they weren't Zionists. They weren't going to Palestine. Um, a lot of them were wiped out. So that's I get the genetic, we have to have that conversation. Um, at the same time, I think we are still underestimating our own resources for resisting and opposing, and ultimately turning this thing back. Okay, um, the you want we'd all like there to be more visible signs of defiance. I use the word defiance, by the way. I hate the word resistance.
Mhm.
Though some of what people are doing now is beginning to look like real resistance, and I'll come back to that in a second. But on No King's Day, right, 2 weeks ago, um, something like 5 to 6 million Americans showed up in roughly 21 to 2,200 locations around the country, and those are just the places that like registered to be on the map. Okay, I'm sure there were more. Just to put that into perspective for you, when the Women's March happened in 2017, it happened in about 500 locations, and slightly less cumulative numbers. The fact that we have this big dispersed movement of people who are saying no to all of this um, is a sign of potential. It's not, I'm actually glad that we're not all saying, let's all go to Washington. It's a pain in the ass to do. It certainly, in some ways, plays into Trump's hands, right? Like, he would have loved to send the military on any protesters who came after his stupid parade that day. Uh, I think that some of what's happening is that people are quite rightly being careful and figuring out what are effective means of opposition rather than just express. Okay, like you, uh, it may make some people feel good to just express protest, but if it doesn't change anything, you want to ask yourself, well, why keep doing it? So the things that I think are good and not enough are things like the Tesla takedown protests, right? That came completely organically. A woman named Joan Donovan, who happens to be a well-known internet researcher, um, posted something on Blue Sky, I think on like February 1st, which was like, why don't we go protest at the local Tesla dealership somewhere in Boston? And it mushroomed from there. And to the point where I mean, Musk, we fractured that piece of the regime to the degree that uh, that alliance between and Trump was so dangerous. I mean, I have no idea what Elon Musk is going to do next. If he follows through on his promise to create a third party now, because he's now opponent of the big ugly bill, that'd be great. I mean, it's going to fail, but it may actually fracture some of Trump's electoral base. The other reason why Musk was so important, why it was so important to reduce Musk, is basically he was promising to spend whatever it took to defend the president's agenda in primaries against any Republican who, showed any sign of dissenting. Now he's saying the opposite. Again, who the hell knows if the guy's going to keep the promise? But um, he went after that judicial race in Wisconsin. He spent $20 million, and his candidate was crushed.
Yeah.
So,
sure. Yeah, that's all true. I mean, I appreciate that.
I just want to give you a little bit of it.
Yeah.
What else are people doing now that I think is good? You're seeing a move towards people forming small teams that are going to places like Home Depot. All right. To do their best to defend day laborers from ICE raids. Now, these ICE raids are horrible. They're a lot like, in the 1850s when bounty hunters came up north and tried to kidnap free black people and take them down south. And those scenes were inflammatory. And they did produce some of the tension that led to the Civil War, but at least they woke a lot of people up. The bottom line to, I think, what you're about to say is, I don't think most Americans feel it yet. I mean, you're a highly sensitive observer of events. So am I. All this stuff has got all our, radar tingling. But I think a lot of people do not yet have actual visceral personal experience of how much is being wrecked. Okay. It's starting to happen. This stupid bill, which will take a while to implement. Let's not forget, Congress passes laws all the time and then it takes them years to actually spend the money. But a lot of these cuts and changes are just beginning to radiate out. And our job as organizers is to highlight those stories, to get to talk to more people, You can't assume that someone else is going to do this work for you, right? When you're in a hole, the first thing you do is stop digging and you start building your path out. And that unfortunately means we have to do a lot of organizing. We have to do a lot of community engagement, and there's no one else coming to save us, right? Like there's no other cavalry out there that's like going to do the work. I would take the last thing I'll say, and then go is what happened last week in New York City. Sort of belies a little bit your point about all these detached young New Yorkers who aren't paying attention. I mean, the turnout numbers in the mayoral primary astounded me because this never happens. You never have an election where the turnout from young voters, people under the age of 40, outnumbers the turnout from people over the age of 60. It just never happens. Older people are the most reliable voters, and younger people are the least connected. A lot of them don't feel rooted to the place where they live. They haven't bothered to register, or they're lazy, or they forgot. They're just not as engaged as somebody who feels rooted to a place. This is why young versus old. We've always had greater turnout from older voters. Zoran Mamdani comes along, runs a fabulous, electrifying campaign, organizes like hell. He had 50,000 volunteers on his campaign. That's like one for every 25 people who voted in New York City. That's big. And it turned out, I mean, there was one pollster who predicted Mamdani would win the primary. And the only reason that pollster got it right is because they decided that they wouldn't exclude from their sample people who had not voted in 2021. And this pollster even said, as it turns out, we didn't weight our sample enough to young people. There were even more young people voting than we expected. So is that replicable? Is it going to happen in lots more places? No. There are a lot of circumstances that make New York City pretty special. But on the other hand, let's take the win. And instead of catastrophizing, see, this is the thing that I hear you doing and I hear a lot of people doing. And that the danger is if you do it a lot, it'll paralyze you into like, well, all is lost. There's nothing I can do. And the truth is, if each and every one of us adopts that kind of cynical, depressed point of view, we will lose for sure. But
Yeah.
we don't do. And the other half of it is it's not on you to solve the whole problem, right? No one of us can do everything that will roll all this back. We each can do something. That's all I'm saying is, find your thing, find your group. Ideally, find some local group, right? It always feels better to do stuff with other people. Other people will keep you honest. They will keep you engaged. And you know what? You might even have fun. You might even make some new friends. And that's what keeps people engaged is social connections, right? That reinforce the sense of I belong to a community that's doing something meaningful, and it's fun to get together and do it. If anything, the
Yeah.
left is fun enough.
Mm-hmm. What's that?
If anything, the left is not fun enough.
I totally
Right?
agree with that. Yeah. Um, no, thank you. I appreciate all of that. And yeah, I mean, Zoran's victory is, a beautiful, hopeful sign in this current desert. By the way, it's saying that my internet connection is unstable. If we get cut off by any reason, you just hang out, and then I'll rejoin, and we'll figure it out.
Okay.
But yeah. So I mean, and in fact, I've been talking with Douglas, and if you know anybody who is in his circle, maybe contributing to kind of like digital strategy, kind of I mean yeah, I mean, having written all these books about civic tech and so
Yeah.
on,
Yeah.
And I assume you're very aware of like Audrey Tang and
Sure.
plurality. Yeah. And the fact is that she managed to revitalize democracy, apparently, in Taiwan to a certain extent. Right? People had lost their trust in democracy, and she created these more resilient and responsive systems. But obviously, we're not going to have that in the nation under Trump, but we could have it in New York or we could have it in California.
Yeah.
Do you know of any initiatives happening now along those lines, or is it sort of still fresh territory in a way?
So just to talk about Taiwan for a second, which is a story I'm pretty familiar with. What First of all, Audrey Tang is wonderful, but I would not give Audrey Tang all the credit. I
No, of
would say,
course.
what's important to understand about the Civic Tech, or what's called Gov Zero, is the name of their community in Taiwan, is that it grew out of a student movement for democracy and transparency in government that 10 years ago, whatever it was, I forget exactly when, the government in power was in the process of pushing a bill that would um, change some trade relationship with China. And there was no transparency around the bill, and people were questioning whether this was a good thing. And student protesters basically went and occupied the square around the parliament, and then more of civil society joined them. And they even got to the point where they went in and occupied parts of the parliament itself. They won a big concession from the existing party to actually allow for time for debate on that bill, blah, blah, blah. But it was an incubator moment. And the movement, which by the way came out of the free culture movement in Taiwan, then allied itself with the opposition party. And the opposition party, which is where Audrey Tang is so important, said, we promise if we get into power, we're going to change how government works. We're going to make it more, not just transparent and accountable, but more participatory. And that's where the civic tech community and movement in Taiwan got to actually do some real things, which are now embedded in the framework of how democracy in Taiwan works. We had something not similar to that here when Barack Obama got elected, in that a lot of the people who worked on his campaign and um, came out of the sort of good, transparent, accountable government world that was using technology to open up awareness and participation. Many of those people also went into his administration, but his administration kind of paid lip service. I wrote a piece about this recently about why Obama's e-government initiatives. He created a website where anybody could create a petition, and then they promised they would answer the top petition questions. Right? Folks may even remember this. And when they rolled it out, one of the top questions was about legalizing marijuana. One form or another, the marijuana legalization movement had organized and pushed to make sure their questions would be somewhere near the top. And Obama's people thought this was embarrassing. They they had promised they would answer the top questions. So when Obama came out with his answers, he joked and he sneered. He said, "Well, I don't know what this says about the internet, uh, typical internet user, right? But we're not going to legalize marijuana to make money for taxes." I mean, in fact, at that time, public opinion was already shifting towards legalization, but the political establishment rejected this. This is the difference between us and Taiwan, right? Our The Obama movement was basically not really an insurgent movement. It was a movement, Goldman Sachs was in charge of, right? Um, so we missed the civic tech community in the United States, kind of got co-opted and missed its moment. Um, Now, what I would say today
Well,
about,
yeah. I
you
mean,
know,
I would, in retrospect, I mean, I just have such a negative feeling about Obama. I
yeah,
mean, such a catastrophic failure and it just turns out that that's who he was. I mean, he was somebody that Wall Street kind of appointed him to deal with the wreckage of the 2008
Right.
crash,
On the
where no Wall Street bankers, were imprisoned.
Yeah, I blame Brown
Um,
well too. I would also just say that for many, many people, Obamacare has actually been a good thing.
mhm.
It's more popular now than it ever was. Uh, so it's a mixed, but yeah, he will not go down in history as one of our greatest presidents. On the other hand, first black president, something. But to answer your question about civic tech now, um, I would say the movement is much smaller than it was. There is still a lot of people who want to make government work better for everyone. And Elon Musk, Doge basically destroyed those people, fired all of them. Many of them are, in effect, in exile, searching for what their next move is. Some of them want to go into state governments. In other words, we have 23 or whatever it is, blue states that are going to have to deal with the of all of these cuts and all of these changes. And so some of these people will end up with plenty to do. Um, I think we're beginning to see more oppositional civic tech. There's this thing called Ice Block, for example, which is an app. I would like to check with my security expert friends about this. We've all been watching the development of these kinds of tools with a little bit of concern because anybody who collects this kind of information becomes very much a target for the Justice Department, right? Like if you report an ICE uh, event, um, we got to be damn sure that none of your information is being collected.
Mhm.
Okay? Otherwise, it becomes really, really advantageous for the Justice Department to just go to the developer of this app and say, "Give me all your data." And if you won't, we're coming at you with the full force of the law. So we have to be really, really conscious of the need to, yes, we can use these kinds of tools um, to gum up the system, to make it harder for ICE to do what it's doing. Um, but what I see mostly happening on that front now are trusted communities using existing consumer technology, whether it's WhatsApp or Signal, um, and not these big anonymous reporting collectives, where anybody can, you know, put information on a map. Who knows if it's really true? Uh, but we're, like I said before, Daniel. I think we're in a moment where a lot is shifting. A lot of people are just beginning, I think, to recognize the impacts, to hear about them from people who they know who are being affected, and so it's early days.
Mhm.
Now, these early days may not be coming fast enough for what you're worried about. To go back to your point about concentration camps and uh, you know Proud Boys deciding to shoot people at demonstrations and so on. I mean, it's possible.
Yeah.
And anybody,
That's only one of my different levels of worry, but essentially essentially what I mean I actually read Russell Voigt's book. I mean
yeah,
and I've been reading all this stuff. I mean they have a basically they want to create a kind of despotic Putin like regime here, and that is what they're about. And like, so for instance, it feels very naive for me when people in the sort of liberal democratic community are putting faith in like the midterm
right.
elections, because I already suspect being more of a sort of more extreme, maybe, yeah, I don't know I can't say paranoid, but I'm more suspicious, I guess, that even the last elections were not tweaked in certain respects,
Mm,
electronically. If you look at how it worked out in all the swing states and how, you know, yeah,
yeah.
it feels there was a little bit of kind of putting a thumb on the scales there. Not to say that Trump didn't have a lot of support. You don't agree?
I don't
Uh,
look
yeah.
having canvassed in Pennsylvania uh, over the course of several weekends. all I can say is the Democratic ticket was not very. It was not moving people. Um, Democrats, Kamala Harris, she was behind the eight ball, but she did not, in the limited time that she had,
Yeah.
put together a coherent campaign or message. And the other side has been at this for a while. You know, we are in a deep hole. The degree to which working class people either have moved to be supporting Trump or just turned off. You know, Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries are not going to save us,
Yeah.
right? So that has to be fixed too. So anyway, but I'm sorry I interrupted. You're making a larger point.
What was my larger point?
Well, it's not that
Oh
you're
yeah, yeah.
about
Well,
the
yeah.
yeah
You good?
midterms. Yes, the midterms. I think we can't put our faith solely in what happens in the midterms. Um, it's also possible that rather than a dystopian, Gilead nightmare, where the entire country is put under the boot, um, it's also possible that because we're a federal system, that there are already parts of the country that are way more fascist. Take Florida or Texas, and there are parts of the country that are way less. I don't, I'm very curious about what's going on in Southern California, in the wake of these ICE raids and in the wake of the explosion of protest against them. Um, the I mean, LA is like, 1/4 immigrant, and a lot of the people there are who are naturalized American or born here are standing up for their cousins or their uncles. Um, and there are more of us than there are of them. I mean, we could be in a situation where, yeah, it will break out into violence. Serious, not just the shit that we've seen so far. Um, and then your guess is as good as mine in which direction things go. Um, I'm a little bit more inclined towards the country breaks apart theory rather than the country has a giant, horrible civil war. If it comes to the type of stuff we started to see happen in LA. Um, who says the United States is going to hang together? I don't know.
Well, that would, I mean, in a way, that would be a good. That would be. I'd be, completely happy with peaceful separation at this point. But I just don't think that's in the cards. Um, yeah, I mean, another thing to
Don't know.
factor in is the influence of artificial intelligence,
Yeah,
uh, both in terms of the way, I mean, Trump is basically already the AI president. I mean, he won in 2016 because of Cambridge Analytica and the machine learning algorithms that tracked 5,000 data points on every adult in the
I don't
US.
that theory at all. That's not
Okay,
why.
good. Good. I'm
I,
glad to hear that.
yeah, no. I Cambridge. Look, there were salespeople from Cambridge Analytica who were members of Civic Hall, the organization that I was running in New York at the time.
Yeah.
We saw some of their sales presentations. They reminded me of the kind of vaporware bullshit that lots of tech startups uh, promote. We've come up with a way to manipulate people so perfectly. You've got to buy it from us. Well, Ted Cruz's campaign hired Cambridge Analytica and then fired them because their shit wasn't that good. Um, these theories that we can kind of manipulate people at this incredibly high level in terms of their political choices are just bogus. What the bottom line is,
I mean, yeah.
most people
Just,
most people make their decision about how to vote based on party identification. Okay, we are in a highly polarized country because we only have two parties, and the two parties have gotten really good at organizing us into two tribes. And it's very rare for people to switch. It's very hard to get somebody to change out of the tribe that they're in. Um, that's like 90% of your voting decision is which tribe, red or blue. Um, and yeah, there was voter suppression for sure, but it's not at the level of 5,000 data points about your personality, and we know exactly what ad to show to you. All it took were, sure, the Russians putting ads in front of urban black men, reminding them that Hillary Clinton called them super predators, which was true. They didn't make that up, right? Stuff like that um, has always been part of politics. And Hillary was not a great candidate. I mean, the idea that Trump only won because of manipulation has to assume that, people can't make a judgment between two shitty choices.
I hear that, but I also definitely feel that because I used to have a big. I mean, I still have a decent size presence on Facebook. I have like 30,000, followers, whatever. And I saw people in my extended community switch into sort of QAnon conspiracy, Maha conspiracy,
Mm,
and people who I, really liked or even loved and trusted. I could see this sort of like brainworm, getting into them to the
mm.
point where they started to, and I think you and I seem to agree that the Democrats are tragic, but they started to hate, for all sorts of reasons, the Democrats to the extent to such a level where they, are more accepting of the
Yep.
Republican kind of like rhetoric and reactionary kind of position, and it happens on a very psychological,
But
kind of like
I
bombardment level.
argue that what we're dealing with here is that's more a sign of the Republican Party and many of these base movements inside it that make it up, like Maha or gun rights, for that matter, being really good at uh, welcoming, evangelizing, and welcoming new people to their ranks. Um, and whereas the left is much more judgmental, much more demanding, much more likely uh, to tell someone that they're not good enough. And we don't welcome the convert. Churches grow by welcoming the sinners into their ranks, right? They don't forgive the sin, but they forgive the sinner. Um, I have a young friend who lives in Texas. We were talking about this recently. He organized for Bernie Sanders. He's trying to figure out what he wants to do next. Um, and we were talking about the different ways that liberals versus conservatives organize people. And he said, "Yeah, I went to, and by the way, we don't have the same grassroots infrastructure that they do. There are more than 20,000 local gun clubs in America. I can't point to anything like that on the liberal progressive side. Okay. Not union halls, not liberal churches. I mean, most of those things are in decline. Um, he described to me, he said, I went to a gun club in the suburbs outside of Austin. Um, and he said, I was really nervous going in because I don't look like the typical person who's going to go, uh, you know, visit a gun club. It was my first time, but I was curious. I wanted to see what it was like to shoot a gun. This is my friend talking. And he says he walked in. As soon as he told the first person there that this was his first time in a gun club and he'd never shot a gun before, they fell all over him. They welcomed him with open arms. They were like, "Oh, you got to try this one. Let me show you how to use that." Uh, he said, "I have never felt so welcome." Now, this is not high level manipulative brain science.
Yeah,
It's the most basic thing. Um, and I think we have to relearn how to be social with people who we kind of maybe have a little discomfort with, but we want to welcome. And the degree to which our side's culture is built up around drawing all these fine distinctions and deciding who's not good enough, just made some horrible, used the wrong word or whatever. I think that it definitely works to our disadvantage.
absolutely. I mean, you know, the left has shot itself in the head, basically, with this. I mean, um, yeah. I mean, I don't, I think some of it is now. I mean, I do think that, the woke progressive mindset is beginning to kind of let go of that a little bit. That's just like a intuition in a way. But I mean, yeah. I mean, look. I mean, there was Me Too and the sort of cancellation culture, and a lot of powerful men who are more on the liberal side got just completely X'd out, who would have potentially had some charismatic capacity
Well, or they
to.
deserve to be X'd out.
Yeah, they did deserve.
Time
They
for them
deserve.
to
They
move
deserve
on.
to some
Yeah.
extent. What's that? Yeah,
No, I mean, look, I think there were
but
excess.
there was no path to redemption, is what I'm saying. You know.
It was yeah. It became, well, I would call it. I actually think that the excesses that were in some ways similar to MAGA, in the feeling that people are looking for almost like millennialism, right? Like you want everything to be solved, um, instead of accepting that things move incrementally. I mean, I remember the young people in my own organization who you know came in with this. We can't fix the rest of the world, and we can't even work on that until we fix ourselves right here, right now, in this one organization. I always thought that was just like, how did we end up on that dead end? Uh,
Hmm.
and it comes out of idealism, uh, and a faith in we transform ourselves, we can transform everything else. But hard to train. Um, and at the same time, most just want the buses to come on time, and the rent not to be so high. Why
Yeah.
on those things? Uh, so
So, is there, since you're connected to Indivisible and these other
yeah,
groups, and I would love to be more connected to these groups, is there kind of a strategic multi-year kind of plan for somehow, yeah, like kind of restoring democracy in a
yeah.
sense, or
So the working, I think the working theory. So Indivisible is one of many that happens to be one with the largest sort of grassroots, so most based approach, um, and they've like doubled size since November. Okay,
yeah,
um, so that's a sign of health. The number of new groups, in addition to longstanding groups that have kind of gotten rejuvenated. That's why 5 million people came out in more than 2,000 locations. That and 5051, which is a completely new phenomenon. Just a lot of people getting together locally to organize and demonstrate opposition. I think the working theory is sustaining the potential for free and fair elections in 2026, figuring out how to defend that. Um, I think that the early days, February, March, April, May, they've been working from one playbook, you know, Earth 1, Earth 2, okay, for the purposes of analytical clarity. The Earth 1 playbook says uh, every administration comes in with this giant head of steam. They push everything they can as they can, and they inevitably overshoot. And then there's a correction in the midterms. And almost like clockwork, I think the only example when this didn't happen was maybe 2002, when George Bush was riding off the 9/11, all his popularity from that. Um, but for the most part, the out party typically, voters kind of go, Congress and the White House is doing too much. We want to put some checks in. We're going to, and all these marginal members lose, right? And that's Earth One. I would say the bulk of the national indivisible strategy is about sustaining the momentum, building the momentum. Uh, if you cannot get any of these marginal Republicans to crack, right? And start listening more to their own voters, then they're going to lose in a year from now. Earth 2 is the one you and I are worrying about, right? Which is, we're not going to have free and fair elections. We'll have free-ish elections, but they won't be very fair, right? The media will be too intimidated. Your average voter won't necessarily make an informed choice, or worse, it'll be hard for people to organize because they're being intimidated. They're being arrested by Pam Bondi's, Justice Department.
Yeah, or the voting machines will themselves be manipulated. I mean, during the Stop the Steal campaign,
Yep.
Trump's people stole a bunch of the voting software, I believe in Georgia. And if you
Yep.
look into the background of some of the big companies that handle the voting machines, yeah, they have a lot of ties to the Dominionist movement and so on.
Yeah. So there's a risk of that. Given how decentralized the voting system is,
Mm.
I'm skeptical of
Yeah,
their ability.
good. I'm happy to hear that. I could be wrong.
Yeah, I remain skeptical of that, but I also defer to other experts who, tend to worry about this in greater detail. I do think it's important that we have a verified ballot. In other words, a paper ballot is better than just voting on a touch screen. So if people live in a state where they're still using paper ballots, but they're trying to get rid of them, boy, you should fight that, because we do have at least a way to go back to the ballot if there's a need to double check what happened in an election on paper ballots. But Earth 2 is the one that we're worrying about, which is the drift of where things are, and if we don't organize more, get more visible, find more ways to elevate attention to what's going on, yeah, then the other side deserves to win. What I won't accept, Daniel, is the reasoning that says we're already lost, and there's no coming back, even if parts of the country turn into a police state. I mean, let's go there for a second, okay? Um, Look at a country like Argentina. Look at a country like Chile. Okay, these places did have the military takeover and the suppression of dissent and the imprisonment and killing of activists and newspaper journalists and so on. And now they are again free functioning democracies. So for the people who catastrophize, remember that there's even a way to keep organizing in opposition under police state conditions, right? The people in Poland who figured out how to build an independent trade union movement under communism, that ultimately was able to organize factory occupations in 500 factories, not just Gdansk, and demand that the government negotiate with them and recognize them. They won. How did they do it? So this tendency to go into the darkest, worst Hollywood version
Yeah,
nightmare of where we're headed, and that it will be inescapable. As far as I know, no one has figured out how to keep someone alive forever, which means Trump will die, right? I'm sure there's a great Yiddish curse that our grandparents could say now about how that may that day, may we live to witness that day. But the fact is, he's a very powerful unifying figure, dangerous as hell, but he won't live forever. And I mean, you've studied J.D. Vance more than me, it sounds like. I don't think J.D. Vance has. I don't think
no,
he got what it takes to hold this whole fractious movement together. I think Trump's sons
no.
Also, I mean, like, there is, even in authoritarian regimes, there is politics,
Yeah,
right? So we may not like, you and I are, I don't know how old you are, Daniel. I'm 63. So we are the generation, our parents too, that got to enjoy like the post-war miracle years of America, of tremendous prosperity. And because we're white, we didn't, we benefited a lot. Um, so we grew up expecting that things would always just get better. Oh, well, now we are joining the rest of the world,
completely.
you know? But
Yeah,
even my friends who live in places like Argentina and Chile continue to have children. They continue to figure out how to live, and even figured out how to oppose what was going on to the degree that they ultimately collectively overturned it.
right.
So maybe that's our fate. Um, but I don't think our fate is permanent dystopian nightmare.
Yeah. Well,
I
I get the concern for that, and I really appreciate what you're saying, and I, of course, I tend to agree with you to a certain extent. Hopefully, yes, to a certain extent. But the concern would be, for instance, like the Palantir Doge piece of the puzzle. So essentially, their capacity now to now that we have all these sort of like self-spying devices in our pockets,
yeah
to basically utilize that as a whole control system. And as AI develops like more and more kind of drones and so on. And also, yeah, I mean, another issue is that I think that most of the people, particularly the urban, like professional white collar class, don't really have much of a future because of AI.
mm,
That there's going to be like tens of millions of layoffs in artificial in programming and legal and graphic design and kind of film production. So those are all kind of like that's sort of like the liberal base in a way. Even in Wall Street, they're talking about a lot of layoffs. So
yep
that also offers up an organizing potential,
yeah
because as those programmers lose their jobs by the thousands, they may be maybe able to see their fate more entwined with the fate of working class people or people in the global south and stuff like that. But the concern is that
yeah
what's that?
I would say, where I completely agree with you is there's no question that the existing liberal order is breaking down and is being broken down, partly by Russell Vought and Doge and all those things, and by this rush to impose AI everywhere. Um, I suspect there will be more resistance. I'm not sure that that congeals neatly into the sort of political movement that we need to stop Trumpism in its tracks now. And things may definitely need to evolve more before something new can pull itself together. Um, uh, it's sometimes I think of our situation as like trying to understand that there's this gigantic tidal force in motion. Populism is a word that people use because it's happening all over the world, right? um and that if you stand there and stand out in front of the wave, it's just gonna bowl you over. um so what you have to do is you have to figure out how to float. You have to, and then build a lifeboat, right? um we will get through this. We will get through it together. The survivalists, the people who think that what you have to do is, kind of prepare for the worst and hide out. I never have understood their theory of how that's supposed to work. Um, and so figuring out how those lifeboats get built is challenging for people who have grown up in hyper individualistic culture that basically says it's all up to you. You have to figure it all out. And if you are good at it, you get win the game and you have a nice big, castle in the suburbs. Um, and enjoy that. Uh, that may be breaking down, but again, the this colossal thing which you're talking about, which is the battle between the haves, the have-nots, and how technology gets deployed and by who to achieve what, that doesn't go away. I mean, all of American history is a history of organized money trying to have its way against people figuring out how to organize themselves enough to get their piece too. And most of the time, organized money is winning because it's hard to keep people organized. It's a pain.
Yeah.
We're not very well organized now, but that doesn't mean we can't do it. It's been done before
Yeah.
multiple times. By the way, how did women win the right to vote when none of them had the right to vote?
Yeah.
You know, explain things like that. So
Was it sex strikes? I actually don't know.
yeah, well, lots of things, including civil disobedience and in some
Yeah.
cases, destruction of property.
Yeah.
Uh, but they also leaned on men. I mean, there are many, many examples of it. So I would
Yeah.
just try for leaven the doomism with a little bit of hope too.
All right. I mean,
Right?
I do that. I do that. But I appreciate. I think we should wrap up. We've talked about an hour now. I would love to chat again. We could also do a three-way with Rushkoff at some point if you'd like.
That's fun. Yeah.
Wonderful to meet you. I get a very beautiful feeling of your like generous spirit and like really wanting to use your talents for the good, and look forward to staying connected and hopefully you tell me what to do, enroll me, and I'll tell my community what we can do to help this thing.
Let's you and I make a time to talk offline or have coffee and
Sounds great.
happy
Sounds great.
happy
Good.
to pull you in.
That's great, buddy.
All
Have
right.
a beautiful day. We'll talk soon.
All right.
Yeah.
Be well.